comparisons of country military power against country in terms of number of personnel and military equipment. The numbers mentioned in the video may change over time. President of Indonesia Joko Widodo and Prime Minister of Singapore Lee Hsien Loong. Area of Indonesia 1,904,569 km and Singapore 729 km. Global rank of Indonesia 15 and Singapore 40. GDP of Indonesia 1.28 trillion and Singapore 425 billion. Capital of Indonesia Jakarta and Singapore City. Populations of Indonesia 279.19 million and Singapore 5.82 million. Defense budget of Indonesia 9.3 billion and Singapore 11.40 billion. Active personnel of Indonesia 4 million and Singapore 60,000. Reserve personnel of Indonesia 4 million and Singapore 2 million. Combat tanks of Indonesia 347 and Singapore 170 plus. Armored car of Indonesia 12,888 and Singapore 435. Armored vehicles of Indonesia 1,430 and Singapore 3,517. APC of Indonesia 920 and Singapore 1,837. MRAP of Indonesia 210 and Singapore 120. Rocket projectors of Indonesia 63 and Singapore 24. Third artillery of Indonesia 153 and Singapore 77. Attacked aircraft of Indonesia 38 and Singapore 0. Training aircraft of Indonesia 126 and Singapore 36. Fighter aircraft of Indonesia 60 and Singapore 100. Strategic bombers of Indonesia 0 and Singapore 0. Stealth bombers of Indonesia 0 and Singapore 0. Tanker aircraft of Indonesia 1 and Singapore 11. Transport aircraft of Indonesia 66 and Singapore 9. Ox aircraft of Indonesia 0 and Singapore 4. Total aircraft of Indonesia 452 and Singapore 244. Attacked helicopters of Indonesia 15 and Singapore 18. Total helicopters of Indonesia 172 and Singapore 79. Electronic warfare of Indonesia 0 and Singapore 0. Nuclear weapons of Indonesia 0 and Singapore 0. Submarines of Indonesia 4 and Singapore 5. Helicopters carriers of Indonesia 0 and Singapore 0. Aircraft carriers of Indonesia 0 and Singapore 0. Destroyer of Indonesia 0 and Singapore 0. Barbados of Indonesia 24 and Singapore 6. Oil productions of Indonesia 775,000 BBL and Singapore 00 BBL.